Welcome to the Zero Hedge debate series. My name is Keith Knight. Today I'll be hosting a debate between Peter Schiff, who is chief economist and global strategist of Euro-Pacific Asset Management, and the author of How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes, and Spencer Morrison, the author of Reshore: How Tariffs will bring our jobs home and revive the American dream. He is also editor-in-chief of the National Economics Editorial. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I first want you to take a few minutes to explain the fundamentals of your position before we get into the specifics. Starting with Mr. Morrison, why are some countries wealthy and others impoverished? Mr. Morrison, you have 5 minutes.
Isn't that the question? Let's see if we can do it in 5 minutes. So this is really the topic of my book, Reshore. And it builds upon, the economic theories that date all the way back to Adam Smith and people who were writing even before him. The economy grows fundamentally when you produce more output or more valuable output. At the end of the day, that's all it is. Okay. So the question really then becomes, well, how do we actually produce more output and more valuable output in the long run? There are lots and lots of ways that people have proposed to do that. For example, in Adam Smith and The Wealth of Nations, he talks about the division of labor. You divide the labor more efficiently. You break products, the production of products down into different steps, and as a result, that produces goods more efficiently. That's a great way to grow the economy. The problem with that, though, is it only grows it so far. You can only divide labor so far before any further division actually becomes inefficient. Let's look at another example. So this one's a little later. This is David Ricardo. He was a British economist. He wrote, this work on the political economy of taxation. This is where that idea of comparative advantage comes from. For David Ricardo, what he said is that trade between different people and trade between different regions, different nations, is a key to getting rich. And the reason for that is because countries will maximize their comparative advantage in making a product. Basically focus all of your efforts on making something you're good at making and trade for the things you're not so good at making. That's the key to getting rich. The problem for that, of course, is, again, the gains from trade are limited. You can only maximize your comparative advantage so much before at a certain point, the trade becomes inefficient again, or you suffer from stagnating returns. So the problem with economics fundamentally is that none of these classical economic theories actually addresses how to grow the economy in the long run. In the long run, the only way you can grow the economy is to improve your productivity. And the way to do that is to improve your technology. Long-run economic growth is nothing more and nothing less than a function of long-run technological growth. And economic history makes it very, very clear. All throughout history, long-run material economic growth is a function of technological growth. I'll give you a couple of really good examples. We go back to 1445, 1453. You have this guy, his name is Johannes Gutenberg, and he invents movable type, the printing press. It allows him, and we all know this, it allows him to print pages of books much faster than somebody could handwrite it. In fact, Gutenberg's printing press increased the efficiency of creating text 90-fold. Okay, so you could print 90 pages on Gutenberg's first printing press as opposed to what they were doing before, which was scribes. Overnight, that was a huge technological innovation, what we might call a black swan event, that not only shifted the economic paradigm in printing, but also the informational paradigm. It created massive economic growth. We jump forward. Let's go to another massive paradigm shift. It happens during the Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, you had these amazing inventions, steam pistons, the flying shuttle, spinning jenny, these sorts of things. They increased economic output astronomically. Another really good example is the forklift and pallet system. Once forklifts were adopted for unloading ships, they put a lot of stevedores out of work because if somebody moving product with the forklift could do it 200 times more efficiently than people who are unloading it by hand. The gains that we had from the inventions, these amazing inventions like the printing press, like the steam engine, like the forklift, shifted the economic paradigm and greatly increased economic output, not just
30 seconds.
geometrically, but exponentially. Okay, so that's the key to economic growth. So if we want to grow the economy, we have to grow our technology. So my position is that anything that we do needs to be ultimately focused on growing the economy in the long run. And I think this is where Peter and I ultimately disagree. What Peter likes to do is offshore all of our key industries and our cutting edge technologies to foreign countries so that the economic growth happens abroad. I want to keep them here in America so that we get that long run economic growth, the good jobs. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Peter Schiff, why are some countries wealthy and others impoverished?
Well, first of all, Spencer, you shouldn't put words in my mouth. You should let me speak them for myself because that's not my position, but we'll get into that. But yeah, I think that Adam Smith answered your question 250 years ago in his seminal work, The Wealth of Nations. I think the most significant part of The Wealth of Nations is the concept of the invisible hand, which Spencer didn't mention. But the invisible hand is what really is behind capitalism. And it's that an individual who has no intention on helping society ends up enriching society simply through his own pursuit of his own best interest. Because in a free market capitalist economy, the way you get rich is by enriching others. You have to produce what others want. You know, the natural state of affairs is scarcity. And in order to create something out of nothing, you need to have ingenuity, you need to have the entrepreneur. Somebody has to produce the things that we all consume. And the incentive to produce that is the pursuit of private profit. And the freer individuals are to pursue their own private profit, whether it's somebody who's starting a business or inventing something, or somebody who wants to pursue a profit by being an employee and working for wages. However, people want to better themselves. The freer they are, the better. The less government interference in the economy, the more people will be able to pursue their self-interest to the benefit of everybody else. And where I think Spencer and I disagree is the level of which government coercion should come into play. I think that people should be left alone, that government is there to protect private property, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, to make sure that nobody takes what's mine. But that's pretty much it. And the rest of it is up to the individuals to pursue their happiness and their wealth to the best of their abilities. And if you do that, you're going to have a wealthy nation. I mean, that's what Adam Smith showed. It's the freer the nation, the absence of government and the absence of regulation, and that is what unleashes the ingenuity and the spirit. And what you need to produce, of course, is savings. And savings come into existence from underconsumption. And savings are what makes possible the capital investment that enables the increase in productivity. And so, government policy that stifles savings, that discourages savings, like the type of policies that we have pursued for decades here with artificially low interest rates, that's one of the primary reasons that we don't have the factories anymore and that we rely so much on what the rest of the world produces, because we haven't made the necessary capital investments ourselves, because we spend all our money and consume rather than produce, and borrow rather than save. And of course, we have too much regulation and too much government intervention in the economy that undermines the free market capitalism that otherwise would have delivered an even higher standard of living than the one that we have now, and one that was not encumbered with all this debt, and we would not be heading towards a massive economic crisis, which I think is in the near future. I think we're headed for a sovereign debt and a currency crisis. That's not what I want to happen, but that's what's going to happen.
In the case of measuring standard of living, this is something that is hard to get agreement on. Some people say it's the time price that each person has to work in order to acquire a certain good. Other people say GDP is how you measure standard of living. So this is how you can verify which economic policies work. Others say look at the stock market. Others say look at the unemployment rate. What is the most effective way to measure a country's standard of living? Spencer, please take a minute to answer that.
Well, first, I'd like to respond to what Peter said. I think he gave a great answer. Unfortunately, it was a non-answer. It was a non-answer. He said that you give people economic freedom and they're going to grow the economy naturally. But of course, it's not a functional answer as to how the economy grows. Economic growth is exogenous to Peter Schiff's conception of how the economy works. And the problem is that economic growth is also exogenous. That is, it's outside of the theoretical system for all classical economic models. If we want to understand how the economy grows, we have to answer the question, how do we grow technology? How do we grow technology? And of course, freedom is a part of that. People need to be free to identify problems, and people need to be free to create and to implement solutions to those problems. But of course, it's not just about freedom. There's other necessary ingredients to that. One of the ingredients that we have to foster is, of course, competition. This is because necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah. Well, now competition is naturally there in a free market.
Okay.
But it's not just competition among individuals. There's different levels of competition because economics, like all organic systems, is fractal in nature. So what we are talking about here is we're talking about, yes, we need the freedom to have competition between individuals. We need competition between businesses. But of course, there's competition between nations, between different trading blocks. All of those are different levels of competition that a libertarian sort of understanding of economics seeks to flatten and remove from the equation. Of course, we need the requisite human capital, right? We need for long run economic growth, we need to foster a population that is intelligent.
We don't have to foster anything. As long as people are left free, they will do that on their own. People are going to pursue their individual wealth, and in the process, they will create the technology that you're talking about. This is a natural byproduct of freedom, right? Because individuals will try to enrich themselves, to increase their standard of living, so that they have more things, more stuff, more free time, more conveniences, and so they try to figure out, how can I increase my wealth? And that's what's the driving force behind innovation and behind technology, because people, have to develop technologies in order to produce the goods and services that consumers want and that will enrich themselves. And yes, of course, there's naturally going to be competition because plenty of people are competing with one another to satisfy those desires at the highest quality and at the lowest price. That is the natural state of affairs if people are left alone, if government doesn't come in and interfere with this process. The problem and the reason so many countries are poor is because government does interfere. You have big governments that have rules and regulations that stifle that innovation and that competition that would naturally be there absent all the government interference.
Well, it's not just, let's be clear, it's not just about freedom. I mean, you could give as much freedom as you want to, for example, the Congo. I don't think they're going to be instantaneously as rich as a country like America
why don't you think
or Norway.
The people in the Congo would benefit from freedom?
I didn't say they wouldn't benefit from freedom, but if we're talking about long-run economic growth, there's more to it than a univariate analysis to talk about.
More to it.
Yeah, of course. Human capital is important. So you need intelligent people. You need people with enough knowledge who are working in the particular field.
They'll get that knowledge if they have freedom to pursue it. Yeah, I mean,
I don't think so. You need to, yeah.
No, yes, sure they will.
All right,
Right.
gentlemen.
I mean, the reality is that you can't. Not everybody can learn to code, Peter, and this is the
What do you
problem
mean?
with
What?
libertarian
Why?
economics.
Is that, are you racist or something? What? Why can't they? Why can't Africans benefit from freedom
Well,
and learn to do whatever we're doing?
it's not just Africans. There's lots and lots of people who, the reality is that people have different levels of intelligence. They have different aptitudes. They have different personalities,
Whoa.
right?
I mean,
And
well, yeah,
Gentlemen.
of course, people have different IQ levels, individually, but as a society, any level of intelligence, not that I think that they're any less intelligent over there. Maybe you do, but whatever the intelligence level is, you're going to be better off if you're free than if you're being controlled by a central planning authority. I mean, the reason that capitalism works so well is because you have freedom, because you have market-based prices, because you have profit and loss. You have important signals that are sent to let people know when they're doing right and when they're doing wrong, and what is a efficient allocation of resources. Because whatever resources one entrepreneur takes up from a society, the land, labor, and capital, the resources that one person uses are resources that somebody else can't use. And to the extent that I am using those resources, I need to utilize them effectively. And the only way that happens is in a free market with competition, with profit and loss, with prices. Prices let you know, right? What something is worth. And without a price, you have no idea, if I should use these resources here, or if I should use them there. That's why when you have a government that tries to set prices, it doesn't work. Centrally planned economies are a disaster. But when you have freedom, then all the things that you want are going to be a byproduct of government leaving people alone.
yeah, but the problem is that you're
their own
treating this as a
self-interest,
univariate
because
analysis. That's not what this is. We need to look at what actually grows the economy and
that's
focus our
what does.
efforts. That is one
It's
element of what
it's
grows the
under
economy. You could
consumption,
have
it's
the
capital
freest
investment,
economy
it's
in the world.
productivity. All
You could
that
have
comes from
you could
economic
have the
freedom.
freest economy in the world, but if the technological paradigm you're dealing with is that of a pre-industrial society, they're never going to produce the material wealth that we currently have, because we live in
how do you
an
think you
industrial
get from
society.
Mr. Morrison,
pre-industrial to
Mr. Morrison,
industrial with economic freedom?
I'm cutting in. I'm cutting in. Mr. Morrison, could you and Mr. Schiff agree that all else equal, it is better to have an free economy where there's private property rights as opposed to an unfree economy? Because it's just not an accurate analysis to say the free Congo versus the 30% income taxed Americans today. Would you agree, all else equal, it's better to have private property and freedom than it is to have the institutionalized aggression against private property with a state?
Well, certainly.
Okay. All right. So we can agree there. All else equal, it's superior to have a higher degree of freedom than it would be otherwise. When it comes to standard of living, if Mr. Morrison is only looking at the unemployment rate and Mr. Schiff is looking at time prices or the Dow Jones Industrial Average, we're not going to be able to get on the same page. Mr. Morrison, please take a minute to let us know how you measure the standard of living to determine whether policies are improving or impoverishing a society. What are the measurements we can use to determine a standard of living?
I think you have to take a very broad-based approach to this, because there is no one statistic that's going to get you the full picture. And I think Peter and I will probably agree on this. A lot of the statistics are not entirely accurate. The way they're calculated is not, consistent year over year. For example, the consumer price index, one of the ways that we calculate inflation, the basket of goods constantly changes because goods are being substituted out. The weighting and the proportions of goods changes year over year. And of course, this changes what we look at when we measure inflation. Of course, the unemployment rate is another way, that they hide a lot of workers who are maybe marginally connected to the labor force or are no longer in the labor force. So I think the statistics are only going to get you so far. I think there's other things that we can look at, overall quality of life. A good example is, do we have the wealth to produce beauty? Do we have the wealth to spend on public works, Do we have the wealth? Are people taking vacations? Are people able to raise healthy, successful, large families? Are people owning homes? All of these things, we need to consider. And I think Peter and I would probably agree on that. A lot of the statistics, as they're calculated, are not super helpful. They give us, and I should note that a lot of them are recalculated too. So every year they're revising the statistics, even going back 10 years. So you have to take a holistic approach to this. See how people are doing, see how people are feeling about it. So it's difficult to measure.
Got it.
Yeah.
So that was
Well,
90 seconds. Mr.
yeah.
Sheriff, what is the
Well,
best
I mean,
way to
I
measure
certainly
standard of living?
don't measure standard of living by the level of a stock market, especially when you have a bubble like we do. But it's more of a quality of life measure. It doesn't fully get captured by GDP because GDP doesn't take into account, leisure, which most people value above a lot of other things. And so, but overall, it's the ability of a society to provide the consumer goods and other things that people desire and people want. So if you have a lot of productive capacity and you have the ability to provide people with things that improve their lives and make their lives better, and they have free time, and it's just the general the way they live and the quality of life and the things that they don't have to do more than the things that they're forced to do. We have a lot of creature comforts now that didn't exist a long time ago. We have machines and all sorts of things that make our lives better and make our lives easier. Um, so there's probably a lot of different ways that you try to measure an overall standard of living of a society. But I think the American standard of living has actually gone down. I mean, I think the peak was probably around the 1950s as far as quality of life for most Americans, average Americans. So despite a lot of our technological advances, I think the growth of government and the size of government and the fact that we have to support such a massive government, I think has really undermined, in many ways, the standard of living of your typical American family.
Mr. Morrison, is there anything you disagree with in what Mr. Schiff just said?
No, I think he takes a similar approach to measuring, economic progress. Like I said, it's not just, what is the value of GDP that we're producing. It's not
Got
it's
it.
not what we're
Yeah.
looking for. What we're
Yeah. I
looking
mean,
for is whether or not we have a good quality of life. And I would agree that the standard of living for most people has actually
yeah.
declined. I would peg
Yeah.
sort of the start of the decline to the early 1970s.
Yeah.
Either
And
way,
like,
it's been
for
downhill for 50
example,
years.
maybe Keith would agree, but a lot of our GDP is legal bills. And I think we'd all be better off without all those lawyers. So I think, there's a lot of stuff in the GDP that doesn't make our lives better, right? That we'd
Yeah,
like to, nobody
that's
wants
true.
to spend money on lawyers, but we end up
Hey,
spending.
I'll give you a good example. The GDP is raised when we do our taxes. We do taxes. It costs $400 billion a year to file taxes.
Yeah.
That
It's
increases the
Yeah,
GDP.
natural
That's fake
disaster,
wealth.
hurricanes, fires, all that stuff
Yeah,
increases GDP, and then we don't want any of that stuff. So it's not a
correct.
really
Yeah.
accurate way to measure an economy, but that's what we use.
What a great accomplishment. Libertarians and MAGA can come together and hate GDP as a measurement. This has already been a success. Starting with Mr. Schiff now. Is there a correlation between countries with high levels of free trade and high standard of living? Is there enough of a correlation to draw a causal connection?
Well, of course. I mean, free trade is part of freedom. I mean, if I'm free, then I should be free to trade with whoever I want, and it doesn't matter where they live. America doesn't trade with China. Americans trade with the Chinese, right? It's not two governments trading with one another. So if I, as a consumer, want to buy something and the product that I want to buy is made in China and that product is more to my satisfaction, whether it's a higher quality or lower price, and I want to buy that, then I should be free to do that. And to the extent that I can buy something in China cheaper than what I could buy if all I could do was shop locally, the extra money that I save, now I can buy something that otherwise I couldn't have afforded. I can now have more stuff because I was able to take advantage of a lower cost item that I was able to buy from China. So the freer people are, the more choices we have, the more competition we have. I don't want just American businesses trying to improve my life. I'd like businessmen and women all over the world working to improve my life because that gives me a better chance. I got more people competing for my business. And the same way, if I have a business and I'm producing a product, I don't want to just be able to sell my product to Americans. I'd like to be able to sell them to everybody. The more customers I have, the better. So everybody benefits from free trade. And it's not an accident that, countries like Singapore, which just has a huge standard of living, is, almost, no barriers to trade, so countries that are open and free and allow their people the freedom to, trade with whoever they want, they're going to be better off. And in fact, I've always thought that if a country is dumb enough to put tariffs on imports from your country, the worst thing you can do is retaliate with tariffs of your own because you're just shooting yourself. So the best thing, regardless of what anybody else is dumb enough to do, is maximize the freedom of your own people. And if other people want to limit the freedom of their people, well, that's their loss.
Mr. Morrison, is there a correlation between countries with high levels of free trade and high living standards? Is there enough to indicate a causal connection?
No, there's not enough to indicate a causal connection. I mean, this gets back to the ultimate debate, tariffs versus free trade. And the problem here we have to understand is that when we have, there's a difference, there's different levels of organization in the economy, just in the same way as there's different levels, of organization in human society. Okay, so when we're talking about an economy and we're talking about competition, there's competition between individuals who are competing for jobs, individuals who are competing with products that they're creating. There's competition between businesses and corporations, and of course there's competition between nations, countries, different states, right? All of these levels of competition are important, and what what Mr. Schiff is essentially doing is he's saying, let's take one of the levels of competition and remove it from the equation, and let's try to flatten everything. So it's a global competition among individuals and corporations. We're going to take nations out of the equation. The ultimate problem with that is it's just not practical. What Peter is saying is, it says, look, if we have a rarefied economy and we're doing everything idealistically, this is what it would look like. It's not practical. That's not what the world actually looks like. What we have actually is asymmetrical competition. In a lot of cases, the American government before President Trump was trading freely. It was trying to trade freely, right? The problem is that our trading partners were not trading freely. They were investing in their own economies. China is a really good example of this. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. Since 2001, about 5 to 6 million manufacturing jobs left America. Most of them went to China. On top of that, there was a hollowing out of supply chains and the jobs that were supported by those factories, because factories are an anchor industry. Other industries sort of spread from them, right? So what China was doing is they were saying, look, this might not be an efficient trade in the short term, but this is a good long-run investment. And of course, what we've seen is China has grown by leaps and bounds over the last 20 years. And America has not. And the reason for that is because China has been trading asymmetrically with America. That's not just the trade deficit, but that's also a tremendous amount of intellectual property theft. Again, in that same time period, China stole almost $10 trillion worth of American intellectual property. That intellectual property, Peter laughs, but it's literally been stolen. I'll give you a good example. I know an inventor. He's a radio engineer. He stopped patenting his inventions. He doesn't file them with the patent office, because if he does that, China comes out with a copycat product 6 months down the road. If they have to reverse engineer it, it takes them more like 2 years. So this is the problem. China is not playing by our rules. They don't respect American property rights. They don't respect America whatsoever, frankly, and they're not trading freely. So how can you have a country that's trading freely interact with a country that's trading you know,
Well,
asymmetrically. All they're doing is siphoning American wealth and pouring it into China. They're using all of the profits to borrow against, to build their infrastructure products, to improve their roads, to improve their ports, to improve their railways. And then look at America. America is utterly crumbling in terms of infrastructure. Educational investments are way down. That's because all of the new investments are happening in the
yeah,
developing world, in India and China, and they're bought and paid for with American money.
but Spencer, you can't blame China for that.
I
Okay,
don't
I
blame
agree
China.
with
I
you.
blame the government that's opened up the borders.
No. The problem, look, China went from a communist country to a country that's a lot more capitalist than communist, right? So they shrank their government and opened up economic freedom to their people. And that is why China has prospered since abandoning that economic model that didn't work. America went in the other direction. What we did to ourselves, right? We grew our government. We made government much bigger. We increased taxes. We increased regulation. We increased government spending. And we destroyed our own industry with excessive taxation and regulation. Now, there was an escape valve that we can now rely on China because China was able to produce what we couldn't. But it's not China's fault that we destroyed our industries. That's our own fault. Our own regulations, our own taxes, our own government, and our own central bank did this to us. And a consequence of this is we have these massive trade deficits. We have these massive budget deficits, which I am against. But I want to get to the root cause of the problem. I'm not going to blame China and say it's your fault. You're the reason we're running these huge deficits. They're not the reason. We've been relying on the Chinese economy as a crutch. We've
Yeah,
been
the reason that we
supported by
have the
their
trade
production
deficits
and
is
their
because we
savings.
lowered our
But in the
tariff
long run,
walls.
this is bad for us. Yes, it's going to be a disaster. It's coming.
Yeah, I
So
can agree with that. It is an economic disaster, and it is caused by the incompetence of the American government. But that
Yeah,
incompetence,
that we'll agree on.
that incompetence was caused by them lowering the tariff walls.
No,
right?
no,
It was attempting to trade freely with an asymmetrical trading partner.
well, look,
And as a result, since 1974, when the tariff walls were entirely taken down, when the gold standard was abandoned, we've run a $28 trillion cumulative trade deficit with the developing world.
yes, I agree with you. We should have stayed on the gold standard. Yes,
The
you're
only
right.
Well, that's something we can agree on. But the reality is that we have had a massive outpouring of wealth from America, and that money poured into developing countries like China, like India, and it wasn't poured into our own economy. I mean, you want to talk about Adam Smith and go back to, well, yeah, it's capital accumulation, right? We're bleeding capital.
We have squandered our wealth. We have allowed our industrial base to disintegrate, and we've just consumed.
Well, that's because of your pernicious ideology that promotes consumption over production.
Junk.
You're saying you want to trade freely with these people when they work for 5 cents on the dollar. Where, of course, they're not going to build factories in America when you can pay somebody in China or India 5 cents on the dollar to do it.
You know what we need
the
to
reason
do?
that we're not making anything is because we've moved our productive capital from places like Pittsburgh. We've taken it and we've moved it to Shanghai.
You know what we need to do? We need to get rid of all these rules and regulations and labor laws, and we got to dismantle our welfare state. So that we
would
can
help.
Have our own people go to work in our own factories. And of course, we can't build those factories until Americans stop buying stuff on credit cards and start saving their money again and putting it in a bank so that an entrepreneur could borrow it to make the investments. But if all you do is erect barriers, that's not going to bring back our manufacturing at all. That's actually going to make what's left of our manufacturing even less productive because so many of the components that American manufacturers need are imported. And that's a problem.
Now, we need to be making those things here. You need to build the tariff walls. The reality is that you can't have a country. You can't have a country without physical borders, and you can't have an economy without economic borders.
That
so if
competition helps. If all you do is keep out foreign competition, you're not going to solve the problems. You're just going to make the problems worse. We got to go to the root cause of the problem, which is our own big government. And that's what needs to be dramatically cut. We need to get rid of most of our federal government. It's too
China
big,
has a big
sucking the
government
life
too.
out of the
Germany has a
economy.
big government as well. But Germany's industries are not offshoring. American industries are offshoring, even though their government is bigger proportionally than America's.
Yeah,
And
well,
the
they
reason for
save a
that is
lot
because
more
they're
than we
protected.
do, and
That's
yeah, they
because the
haven't.
capital is not flowing out of the country because they've erected barriers to prevent it
That's
from
not
flowing
why.
to
No,
China.
that's not why it's not flowing out. It's not about the barriers. Plus, they run trade surpluses. They don't run these massive deficits that we do.
Because they have tariffs.
No, it's not because
Because
of
they have
tariffs.
tariffs.
No, it's not because of tariffs.
America had tariffs for over 150 years, and during that period, America rarely ran. They had balanced trade.
Yeah, and
We need to balance the trade, and the way to do that is with tariffs.
We had trade surpluses without tariffs. But remember, the reason America prospered when we had tariffs was not because
We've never
of the
had
tariffs.
trade surpluses without tariffs.
We
That's
didn't
factually
prosper.
incorrect.
Let me finish this point. We didn't prosper because we had tariffs. We prospered because the government was so tiny that we can afford to support it with tariffs. What we didn't have back then was a personal income tax, a corporate income tax, a payroll tax, state income taxes. Americans were truly free when all they had to do was pay tariffs.
Yeah,
And
but it's not just about taxes.
tariffs-
The reality is that the offshoring would happen even if there was no regulations because the cost of doing business is so much lower in places like China or India.
No, because look
if
at
you
all.
want to have,
We had huge
if you want to
trade
have the high
surpluses.
level of wealth for your workers, wealth is like water. You know this. It flows downhill until the levels are equal. So what happens right now is America has a high level. We have high paid workers. We have a high value industry.
Not as high. We used
And
to
of
have
course,
higher
those
paid
are
workers
off.
than we do now.
Well, and the reason for that is because those jobs and that investment has flowed to
Those
lower
jobs got destroyed.
cost
Right,
jurisdictions.
by labor unions, by government regulation.
They would have been destroyed
all the
anyways
ways
because
that-
Americans weren't going to work for 5 cents on the dollar.
No, they would not. Look, before
You cannot
any of this
match
stuff-
China on price.
Look, yes,
If you
used
think you
to
can,
have-
you're foolish.
No, we used to pay the highest wages in the world in the 1930s and 1940s and 1950s. We paid the highest wages in the world, yet we had trade surpluses with everybody. And we didn't have protectionist tariffs. We had more capital. What made American workers productive was the capital they had. So we could pay them high wages because they had a lot of capital.
America had the highest tariff rate on average all throughout the 1800s. It was one of the highest tariff countries. And not only that, but the barriers to trade were physical at that time because you couldn't transport bulk goods.
Yes, that wasn't a good thing.
Right?
That's a bad thing.
Well, it was a good thing because it forced us to invest our resources in our own capital. It forced us to invest in our own education, and it forced us to invent and deploy new technologies, which we're not doing anymore. We're outsourcing the invention of new technologies to different countries.
What do you think would happen?
And we're losing the cutting edge.
Wait, Spencer, what do you think would happen to America right away? Let's say we cut off all trade with the rest of the world, right? And said, okay, we're just going to consume what we produce ourselves, right? And we're just going to be a closed economy. What do you think would be the immediate impact in the United States of that situation?
Well, I don't care about the immediate impact. I care about the long run ramifications
but we got
of it.
Before we get to the long run, what would happen initially?
Well, I think it's fairly obvious. Initially, consumption would have to decrease because we don't have the capacity to make everything that we're consuming.
It would collapse, and most people would lose their jobs, and everybody and everything would crash. People would be out of work. We'd have to default on all the debt. We'd probably have runaway
but that's going to happen anyways, because at some point we have to pay the piper. We cannot run infinite debts to pay for all of the, we can't run infinite debt to pay for all of the goods that we're importing. So we're going to have a bubble, and that bubble is going to burst either this year, next year. It's going to burst 10 years from now. Who knows? Yeah, but we have to be intelligent about this. We have to reshore our production and increase our productive capacity so that we can deflate that bubble over time. And the only way to do that is to actually reshore the factories. No, we have to reshore our industry. You can't do it without tariffs. Okay, how do you reshore the factories without tariffs?
No, it's not happening. Nothing is happening.
I know you're just sitting here waiting for the bubble to burst, but you have no solutions on how to deflate it slowly. I have a great solution.
Plenty of solutions.
Yeah, the solution is the time-tested wisdom of tariffs. We were doing it for 200 years. We can do it again.
I have all kinds of free market solutions to our government-made problems. But more government, see, tariffs is just more government. And more government is not going to solve the problems that government created. It's free market capitalism that's going to solve those problems. We need to
The
unleash
government
that.
created them by lowering the
No,
tariffs, though. That's the problem.
So, Mr. Morrison, is it your position that if America has a trade deficit, that is inherently bad?
Yeah, long run chronic trade deficits are inherently bad. And the reason for that is fairly simple. And I think Peter will agree with me. The books ultimately have to be balanced, right? So if we're running a trade deficit, what that means is we're purchasing more from foreign countries than we're selling them. And we've been doing that ever since 1974. When you account for inflation, we've purchased from foreign countries 28 to 29 trillion dollars more than we've sold to them. How did we balance those books? Obviously, they weren't giving us the goods for free. So we balanced them by selling assets, that is production that we made in the past, so things like real estate or ownership of American corporations, or we sold them debt. What this has done is it's caused some very big problems, not just from a political sovereignty level, but from an economic problem. In terms of the sovereignty issue, in order to pay for this trade deficit, we're selling a tremendous amount of land. This is why China, for example, has been able to buy up all this American farmland. Last year, it's something like $80 trillion on average of land and real estate is sold to foreign investors every year. And of course, they're not living in the property; they're just buying them to hold them as assets. This is dispossessing, Americans from being able to purchase homes. That's raising the cost of living for Americans. It's taking real estate off the market. And then, of course, we're selling ownership of the corporations. And this is why, since 2001, there's been a massive jump in foreign ownership of American corporations, such that we are selling off sovereignty, control of our assets to foreign investors. That's a huge problem. The other side of the equation, of course, is debt. We've sold off a tremendous amount of debt to foreign creditors, and as a result, not only are we paying them for the goods, we're paying them interest to pay for the goods as well. That's why debt is especially pernicious. So this is the problem with the trade deficit.
Yeah.
We have to sell off, grandma's wedding ring to pay for our groceries, and then we're racking up our credit cards. This is not sustainable. The only way to have a productive economy and to be rich is to actually make value. Peter and I agree on that point.
Mr. Schiff, the question is, are trade deficits inherently bad? Work into your answer. A response from Mr. Morrison, please.
Yeah, I mean, we basically agree on this. I mean, trade deficits are not always bad. It depends on the circumstance. If you are running a current account surplus, let's say you're a nation that is a wealthy nation and you have a lot of overseas investments, and the income that you earn on your foreign real estate holdings and foreign stock holdings, if you then use that income to buy goods from other countries so that your investment income covers your trade deficit in goods, that's fine. I got no problem with that. The problem is when you also have a current account deficit like the United States, where we used to be the world's wealthiest creditor nation, even as late as the 1980s. We're now the world's biggest debtor nation. So we are running huge debts in order to import goods, right? So we're selling off our cows so that we can buy foreign milk, right? We are selling off our assets, right? So we're going into debt. Either we're borrowing money or we're trading shares of publicly traded companies, private businesses, American real estate. We're trading that for depreciating consumer goods, right? We're buying TVs, cars, furniture, clothing, right? All this stuff, we use it up and it's gone. And that's what we get. Yes, our lives are better in the short run because we get to consume all this stuff. But how are we paying for it? We're selling off our country. We're selling off our assets to the point that ultimately we just end up, as sharecroppers in the whole country is owned by foreigners. And, we're just tenants, right? And we're getting poorer and we're just indulging ourselves. But it's our own government that has pursued monetary and fiscal policies that has led us down this primrose path. That's why we're here. We're not in this situation because the rest of the world screwed us over and sold us all this stuff that we couldn't afford. We screwed ourselves over. We pursued the policies that chased our industries out of the country, yet enabled us to keep on spending money that we didn't earn. So I agree. These trade deficits are a problem, but they are a consequence of the problem that resulted in these trade deficits. And because they've perpetuated for as many decades as they have, we have this huge economic problem now.
Mr. Morrison, do you have a response or disagreement with anything Mr. Schiff said that you'd like to clarify?
No, Mr. Schiff agrees with me. We agree that the large chronic trade deficits, are bad because we're selling off our inheritance and we're selling off our future to pay for current consumption. So that's obviously a huge problem. We can agree on that. What we disagree on is the solution to it. What Mr. Schiff says we need to do is reduce government regulation, reduce taxes, get the government out of our lives.
Spending.
Yeah, and spending. And that's going to solve these problems. Just for clarity, I actually agree with Peter on those points. We do need a smaller government. We do need to get the government out of our lives. We need to reduce the regulations. Nobody's actually disputing that. However, the point that I'd like to emphasize is if all things were equal and we had, let's say we had a very minimalist government, it doesn't actually matter at the end of the day as it relates to offshoring. And the reason for that is because the countries that we're trading with have asymmetrical markets. So there's a massive incentive for companies to offshore, regardless of whether or not the tax rate in America could be zero. There could be zero regulations. And the reality is it's still cheaper to do business in countries where people are willing to work for 5 cents on the dollar. So those companies are going to move their production abroad anyways. This is why tariffs are required.
We have a vast.
The second point is that
we have
we don't want to live in that world anyways, though.
Can Mr. Schiff please respond to that first point? If we ushered in anarcho-capitalism tomorrow, we'd still be subject to foreign competition buying up American land and losing jobs to foreigners. Mr. Schiff, please address that.
Yeah, well, first of all, we do have an advantage, right? Because we're here. And if you produce something here and you don't have to put it on a ship and send it across the Pacific Ocean, that's an advantage, right? We've got, millions and millions of Americans that don't work at all because they're living on welfare or some government handouts. So if we take those government handouts away, they got to go to work, right? And if we eliminate all these barriers to entry, occupational licensing, minimum wage, mandatory unemployment, and all this stuff that we do to drive up the cost of hiring our own people to do these jobs, then we'll have workers, and and prices will come down. We'll be able to produce stuff ourselves, just the way we used to. Before we had all these government programs and regulations that made it so expensive to hire people and that paid people not to work and gave people an alternative. Because most people, if they don't have to work, they won't work. A lot of people screw it. I just assume live off the government. I don't like waking up early in the morning and going to work. I'd rather get a check in the mail from the government. Yeah, I mean, it's not the greatest. I'm not rich, but, I got free time. I got a lot of leisure. I prefer that. We got to take that option away from able-bodied people to say that you don't have to work. You can just live off the rest of the country on this welfare program. But I think if we freed up our economy, we'd be able to produce things. But to the extent that you say, oh, even if we do all that, if we can still get something less expensive from another country, we shouldn't do it, because everybody is a worker, but everybody is a consumer. And if you say, oh, we got to protect the workers, but you're also hurting them as consumers, because at the end of the day, whatever you're doing that drives up wages in the United States drives up prices. And that means that everybody has to pay more for what they buy, including the workers that you're supposedly protecting when you're trying to eliminate foreign competition. The more competition there is, the better. Competition helps everybody. We want competition. We don't want to eliminate it.
Yeah, I mean, we're really sort of missing the point here, though. What we want to do is we want to have a trade policy and government policies that promote the invention and deployment of new technology.
Yes,
That, right?
of course.
We need to be doing, but we can't do that if we've moved all of the data centers, to a third world country because it's cheaper. We can't do that if we stopped training our own software engineers because it's cheaper to hire software engineers in India. And this brings us to the H-1B,
Well, why isn't
the H-1B visa issue and offshoring of tech to India, right? We're offshoring all of our productive assets to foreign countries. And the reason we're doing that, simply put, is because it's much, much cheaper to do it there. It's cheaper to do it there. We don't want to be racing to the bottom with a country like India for our wages, because the only way we can go is down, right? We don't want that to be happening. So we do need barriers to prevent.
We want prices to come down.
Prices are going to come down as industry becomes more technologically productive. A good example of that is, Henry Ford. In the 13 years that he was making the Model T, the cost of the Model T decreased every year. And that was because technology improved, processes to manufacture that improved, right?
Yeah,
and he was able to pay his workers more during that period.
Before we had the Federal Reserve and the money printers, prices came down for everything. That's what prices did. In 1900, the CPI was half of what it was in 1800. So you had 100 years of prices going down for everything, because that's what capitalism does. It brings down prices.
America had the highest tariff rates in the world during that period. I'll just note that for the record.
Just to define for the audience, because I was not familiar with this definition, an H-1B visa allows U.S. employers to temporarily hire foreign workers in specialty occupations which require at least a bachelor's degree or equivalent and involves fields like technology, engineering, and medicine. My understanding of what that actually was very different, so I just wanted to clarify what H-1B is in reference to. When it comes to your worldview, Mr. Schiff, what are your thoughts on the H-1B visa policy that America should have?
Well, I mean, the only problem I have is they limit the number. I think, I don't know, is it 70, 80,000 a year? Only about maybe 10 or 15% of the applications get approved because they go into a lottery or something. I think we should have more. Companies should be able to hire whoever they want. If the best guy for the job is in India, hire him, right? If that's going to make your company more productive, more competitive, then hire the best, wherever they are. The problem is when you make it so that we can't bring them in, and now Donald Trump wants companies to pay $100,000 up front to bring somebody in, right? Well, obviously, a lot of smaller companies can't write the $100,000 check, so they won't be able to bring the worker in. But what ends up happening, it's not like, okay, I can't bring in this guy from India, so I'll hire some American who I can't even find one that could do the work, because otherwise I would have hired him. But what they end up doing is they just hire them anyway. They just don't bring them to America. They just have them work from India, right? They don't come here. They still pay them. But that's not a great deal for our economy, because let's say I'm paying somebody in India $30,000 a year, right? I expense the $30,000, write it off on my taxes. The government doesn't see a nickel because all the money goes to India. But if I bring the guy over here, and maybe I got to pay him $50,000 because he's here or whatever, because he's got high, but now he pays U.S. income taxes, he pays payroll taxes, he's got to rent an apartment, he eats in restaurants, he's recirculating his income right back into the economy. I mean, it seems like it's a better deal for us to allow the company to bring the worker here than to force them to just outsource it and just send the money to another country. But that's what's going to happen, right? Because now Trump is making it more expensive to bring people in, more people are going to stay where they are, and we're just going to send the money over there.
Mr. Morrison, please let us know your position on H-1B visas. Is it inherently bad? Is there too much, too little? What are your thoughts?
Well, there's far too many. I mean, immigration in general, both legal and illegal, is a massive problem. The problem with libertarianism and sort of these pseudo free market guys here, the problem is that America is not a shopping mall. America is not a hotel. America is not a business. America is not an economy. America is a nation of people. Those people have a shared background, a shared culture, language, a shared tradition. And the nation cannot survive when the interests of the people are ultimately subverted for foreign interests. It doesn't matter if those foreign interests are simply offshoring the jobs to a foreign country because you can do it cheaper, or bringing the people to America to work cheaper. That's the problem with the H-1B visas, is ultimately it's denying opportunity from the American people. There's two elements that I'd like to comment on in relation to that. The first element, is practical. It's power. The second issue is money. So if we're talking about H-1Bs, from a political perspective, what we're ultimately doing is we're training up the competition. We're bringing people here. A lot of them, as Peter mentioned, don't ultimately stay here, but they're getting all of that technological expertise. They're getting to see how we do things, how we build things. And then guess what? They're going back home and they're training everyone else at home to compete with us. We're training our competition, which doesn't make any sense to me, because you wouldn't do that as a businessman. Like, I wouldn't hire a lawyer at another law firm to come here, train them for 1 or 2 years, make them the best litigator in the city, and then they leave so that they can compete with me for clients. That's very foolish, but that's essentially what we're doing with the H-1B visa system. Of course, it's a vector for intellectual property theft. America is getting pillaged with intellectual property theft, and most of that is actually happening at the corporate espionage level. So a lot of these people, who come in here, learn the technology, and ultimately that technology gets leaked, right? This is a huge problem, and this has been the subject of lots of reports. And of course, we lose control over the companies, because a lot of the people who come over, they are not Americans. Some of them would like to become Americans, but when they come over, they're not. And a lot of them practice nepotism, in particularly, ethnic nepotism for Indians, right? They're very likely to hire their friends or their kin because they come from that sort of kinship culture. And ultimately what that does is it dispossesses Americans of ownership of their companies and control of them. And if we're talking about it from the money side of things, the reality is that America should be prioritizing American workers over foreign workers. So what we do when we bring in all these H-1B visa workers, and there's about 500,000 of them in the country at any given time, that causes unemployment. It causes unemployment because that's a job that an American would otherwise need to do. But the H-1B visa workers will do it cheaper. And that's why I think this H-1B visa executive order, it needs to be annual, and it should apply retroactively to all people who came in or who intend on renewing their H-1B visa licenses.
Yeah,
of course, when those people lose their jobs, leads to wage stagnation, lowers the cost of wages in the exact same way that if we take the job and we offshore it to China or India, that lowers the overall wages in America because we're competing with people in China and India. This is the same thing, except for we're bringing the people here, which is actually even worse, because now not only are we competing with them for jobs, and that's lowering American wages, it's also increasing the cost of housing and the cost of resources. I mean, you look at the cost of housing in Silicon Valley, San Jose area, it's astronomical, because you get 500,000 people from India coming here. Many of them are very, very rich, or they're making a lot of money. They're competing with Americans for houses, which is driving young Americans out of the market. And the worst part about all of this is its investment in training.
Yeah.
If America were a closed system, America would have to invest in training American workers to fill these jobs. But we're not doing that because it takes a lot of time, energy, and resources to set up those institutions to invest people, right? So we're not investing in our own people. Instead, what Google and these other big tech companies are doing is they're building training centers in India because it's way cheaper. So they're training people in India, those people, and then they offshore the tech to India, or they bring in the cheaper Indian workers to America. But they're not investing in American education. And we see that not just with the H-1B, with the tech sector. We've also seen that with healthcare. America, this is a really disgusting statistic, but the number of physicians that are trained in America has barely changed since the 1970s, even though the population has doubled, and the population has been aging. And the reason for that is we're not investing in medical schools because we're hiring foreign doctors. We're investing in foreign education institutions. We're investing in foreigners to come and do those jobs. And what that ultimately does is it kicks out the ladder from young Americans.
Yeah. Got it. Mr. Schiff, please respond to. Please respond to IP theft. America is not a mall. U.S. workers should be prioritized. It
Right.
causes unemployment. It causes wages to stagnate, leads to a housing shortage
Right.
and a doctoral shortage.
Yeah.
Whichever of
Uh,
those you would like to
yeah, I'm
address,
going to
please
talk
do.
to about a bunch, but one of them I'm not going to get into because it would take too much time, and that is the disaster of the government school system here in the United States, from K through 12 through higher education. If we simply got the government completely out of education, especially the federal government, we would not have these problems. We wouldn't be educating people to do nothing. But um, getting back to your point, first of all, I mean, we're a nation of immigrants. To say that we're not, I mean, all four of my grandparents came to America as immigrants. I mean, the biggest boom in the United States in the 19th century happened with massive immigration. I mean, much more than we have now, as far as a percentage of the population. People were pouring in by the millions every year, coming from all over Europe and just showing up in the United States, and that helped grow the economy. I mean, the economy benefited from all of these people showing up to work and all of their ingenuity and everything that they contributed to our culture. So, I mean, that's what America is, right? When you're talking about we gotta protect American workers, the government isn't there to protect workers, right? We need to be protected as individuals. Everybody is a worker. If I start a business and I'm an employer, I still work. In fact, I probably work harder than any of my employees. I'm still a worker as a self-employed small businessman. And if I run a business, it's not, you can't tell me who I can hire and who I can't and what I have to pay people. And if I can find a better deal on somebody who will help me run my business that I started myself, I took all the risk, I put up the capital, it's my business, then I can hire who I want. And if I can get a better deal on hiring someone in India, then that's what I'm going to do. And it's none of your, job to tell me I can't do that. To
Yeah,
say
you
no,
sell out
some
your
American,
countrymen
some, some wait,
for some silver.
you can't say no. Some American deserves that job. Nobody deserves a job. You have to earn a job. You don't just get a job. Somebody has to hire you. And so, in order for you to get a job, it has to be in the best interest of the employer to give you that job. You can't demand the job as a right. It's not your right. And so I have a right, if it's my business, to hire who I want. And if I can get a better deal, but that's also going to benefit society, because to the extent that I can hire people who are better at the job and maybe are less money, then I'm going to produce my products or services at a lower price. And that's going to benefit all of my American customers who are benefiting from the fact that I was able to reduce my costs by outsourcing some of my labor. Now, the question is, why is it that I have to go to India to hire somebody? Why can't I find somebody in the United States to do the job? That's a different question. When we have so many Americans who do nothing, who are not working at all, right? And when you talk about when I bring people in and, oh, they're going to want houses. If I bring in engineers and computer people, they're going to need houses. Great. Let's have more immigrants coming in to build those houses, right? Why keep out all the workers who would build houses? You know how quickly they build houses in places like Dubai? The construction costs, they have people coming in from all over the world to build houses over there for all the people who are coming in. We have so much land in America. We have so many resources. There should be no reason that we can't build houses for everybody who wants to come here, right? Let's let people come in and help us build houses, and let's get people who are collecting welfare checks off their butts and get them out with a pick and a shovel or whatever, and get them helping to build houses. I mean, we need people, we need Americans to work. I mean, you act like, yeah, we should be upset if somebody comes here from another country and works hard, right? I'm upset of Americans who are born here who don't work at all. That's what bothers me. I'm fine with somebody coming to my country who wants to improve their lives and work hard, right? Because we all benefit from the labor and the hard work of other people. I don't like native born Americans who do nothing, who just want to sit on their ass and collect a check from the government. Right?
What are they supposed to do? You sent all the jobs overseas with the exact policies that you're promoting. I mean, we're
No, I
talking
mean,
about
I
the
agree.
dispossession of
No,
over
no, no.
10 million jobs that
Yeah, I
have
agree.
left
We're gonna
America's
get rid
shores.
of the minimum wage law, get rid of the occupational licensing, get rid of the payroll taxes, get rid of all these, ways that employers can get sued. It's so, it's so easy to sue your employer. One of the reasons that American employers try not to hire Americans is because they can't afford the legal bills. America has made it so easy to sue your employer that they've made it very dangerous to be an employer. And so
Yeah,
we
and
got
as
to
a
get rid
result,
of
what they
all these
want to do is
laws.
they want to import foreign workers that have less rights and will work for less money so that they can treat them like crap and keep
They
Americans
don't treat.
unemployed.
You think people
Doesn't
come
make
here
any
to be
sense to
treated
me,
like
and I
crap?
think, frankly, this whole
You can't.
ideology is rather
You
immoral. But
you
we have a
can't treat
fundamental
people like
difference
crap. Now
with the
quit.
role of the government. The government is not here to simply protect individuals. The government is there to protect the interests of the American people.
No,
And the
that
interests of the
we're
American
individuals.
people.
It's individual liberty.
No,
No.
yeah, what you're doing is you're conflating things, and you're denying the ontological reality that America exists as a nation. The reality is that people are not simply atomized individuals who are out to produce and consume for themselves. People, I mean, Peter, you're a father, so your identity is not simply Peter Schiff. You're also a father to a number of children. You're also a son. And also important to that, probably you know your neighbors. You're a member of a community, I would imagine. I don't know exactly where you live, but perhaps you're part of, you identify as your state. Of course, you identify as an American as well. And the reality is that all of those different levels of reality ontologically exist. And you can't sit there and say that the only role of the government is to protect the individual, because that comes at the expense of all of the other levels of reality.
No,
And
it
that's a
doesn't.
huge problem. No, of
No,
course
it
it does.
doesn't.
You cannot protect the family if you prioritize only the interests of the
No,
individual, because
no,
uh,
there.
and you cannot protect the interests
What
of
do you think
America
a
as a
family
whole when
is?
you.
It's a collection of individuals,
No,
but
it's not. A family is not a collection of individuals. A
there are
family
laws.
no, it's a marriage between a man and a
Yeah,
wife.
they're two
And
individuals,
they're
but
not two individuals. They're one economic
well,
unit
they're
under
two
law,
individuals who
and they're
got
bound
married and they're a
sacredly by
couple.
God to be a couple. The family
Right.
exists
But
independently of
they
the two
don't get
individuals.
you don't get, but you're still two individuals that have decided to marry each other and form a family. But
Yeah,
what
but
I'm
now the
talking about
family also
is
exists. You can't say that
and
the family doesn't exist. The family has
no, I didn't say it
interests.
doesn't
The
exist,
family exists,
but
and
the
it has
laws
interests that are different than the interests of just the husband or just the wife or
but
just the
it's not
child.
maybe for me, but not for the government. The government isn't supposed to be doing that,
Well,
you
if
know.
you
But
acknowledge that a family exists independently of the individuals that constitute the family,
but
then likewise you must acknowledge that the nation exists independent of the fact that it's composited of different individuals.
yes, there's a nation, there's a government there,
So
but
why
it's,
wouldn't yes, but the nation is not the government. The nation is the collection of people
right, but we
that have
don't
a collective will.
right,
And
but
why
we're not a
shouldn't the government
collective.
prioritize that?
Yeah, but this is not a socialist state where it's a collective where we do things for the good of the state.
Well,
We're
we're not doing
supposed
it
to
for
be a
the good of the
nation of
state. We're
rugged
doing it for the
individuals.
good of the people. We're doing it for the good of families, not simply. We cannot sacrifice the
So
family
what's the good?
and the people on the altar of the individual.
No, but
You are not
what do you?
God. Individuals are not
So
God.
I
We
don't
need to have a
understand.
broader
So
understanding of what we are as humans and our relationship with the universe.
so how does diminishing the rights of the individual empower the family? I don't understand. How does taking away the rights of a man and a woman somehow strengthen a family?
You cannot have a family without sacrifice and the diminishment of rights of individuals. But the point is that
I,
the rights of the family
I don't
are
know. I don't
valuable
lose.
and
I
more
mean, look,
important. No,
you
of
don't
course you
lose.
do. I do a lot of divorce law. Trust me. There's a family unit, and it has different interests than the individuals may have.
Yes, but it's
But
up
the
to the
reality is that
individual family
sometimes the
members to work
individual.
on that themselves and pursue those interests collectively
No,
if they want.
you
But this
you
is a
pursue those
family.
interests as a family,
But those
and we
interests are not
pursue
going to be
interests as a
served
nation.
by protectionism, by government, by minimum wage laws, and all these other things that
No,
are
of
going to
course they
undermine
are.
it.
Of course they are. You split your income with your wife, right? You
Well,
split your resources
how
with your
does the
wife.
minimum wage law benefit the family?
Well, I don't care about minimum wage. I think we can both agree that we're not in favor of the minimum wage.
All right,
So
because
who
that was
cares?
one of the topics we were supposed to discuss. All right. Well, so how does
Okay.
it, you know, So how does keeping workers out of the country benefit the family?
Well, it benefits it benefits America in the same way that keeping foreigners out of your house benefits your family. I mean, the reality is that
Whoa,
you
whoa,
have a
whoa, whoa.
limited number of resources and income, and you're there to provide for your wife and your children, and perhaps other members of your family.
Well, what if one of
But
the ways I
why
provide,
would you let people into your house to say, oh, well, they have an income, they can come and pay
you
part of
know,
my mortgage?
one
They're
of the
not a member of the
ways,
family. They don't get to just come in. They don't have a right to come
yeah,
in. The same thing is true of the nation. People don't just have a right to come to America just because they're going to grow the GDP.
but
Who cares if they grow the GDP? We are worth more than our GDP. We've got other
right.
things
But
that,
what if,
that are
so what if,
valuable that we need to protect, like our cultural heritage, like
right.
our environment.
So what if there's a family and unfortunately both the husband and the wife really need to work, but they have kids. And let's say they want to hire uh, um, uh, a somebody to stay at home, a housekeeper to take care of the house and watch the kids.
They're
But they
very
want to
blessed, I
bring
suppose.
somebody in from Mexico to do that because they can't afford, because it's too expensive to hire someone in America. And they want to bring in someone from Mexico to take care of the house and watch the kids. Why can't they do that?
Oh, well, I'll tell you what, if the jobs weren't being offshored, perhaps they could afford to have a family on a single
No, no,
income like
no.
they did
They
in the
just they
1970s.
no, they can't. They
But they
back
can't
then they
do
were
it
able to
because
afford it. They
free
can't
traders
now.
shipped all the jobs abroad, and the government brought in what, 100 million people to immigrate
You
to
know,
America? And that drives down wages and
the
it
women,
increases the cost of housing. So now what we
in
have is an
America,
economy where you
look,
can't actually raise a family on a single income that you used to.
yeah,
And we
yeah,
can't afford to have kids because we're paying for all the foreigners to have
yeah.
kids.
Look,
That's the
it,
reality.
yeah, 100 years ago, right? And you could go and look at the old newspapers, right? It was very easy to hire a young woman in America, 19, 20, 21, 20, to watch your house and take care of your kids and clean the house. The domestic workers were very easy to hire. It's almost impossible to hire them now because they'd rather just go on welfare, have kids, and collect money than take care of somebody's house. I mean, we've given um, a lot of young women who used to do these jobs, we've given them a better deal, and so they're not available to do the jobs.
They don't have
And
a
so
better deal. All of these young women are in the workforce now working.
no,
Whereas
they're
50
collecting
years
well,
ago, they didn't have to work. They could take care of their families.
well, that's another story. Yes. Well, when they got married, once upon a time in America, when a woman got married, she didn't have to work because her husband could afford to support her. The
Yeah, you
reason her
can't do that
husband
now
can't,
because the jobs are all gone.
no, the reason is because the government is so big and the taxes are so high. If you had a job as a man in the 1930s, you didn't pay any taxes. You got to keep everything that you earned. Now, you're paying all these taxes. That's the problem. So much of your paycheck gets taken away by government that there's not enough left for your family. So now your wife has to come in and work to pay the taxes that you gave to the government. That's what's happening. We didn't used to have a payroll tax. I mean, we didn't have an income tax until 1913, but no middle class American paid the income tax until the Second World War.
Yeah,
And
but
that
it's
was
not
a
just about
temporary
the income
victory
tax. I
tax.
mean, if you look at the cost of living, the primary reason that the cost of living has increased is the cost of shelter, the cost of housing, and what is
Yeah,
driving
why
up
is
the
that? The
well,
government
what's
ran up the price of houses with their
no, the,
government.
the reason that the price of housing is being driven up is primarily because 100 million people have moved to America, and that puts
No,
pressure on the housing market. And then on top of that, we're selling off, 80 to 100 billion dollars worth of real estate to foreign investors to fund the trade deficit because we don't produce anything anymore because people who think like you took all the factories and moved them abroad so they could
I
save
didn't
50
take them.
cents on
I
a
didn't move them
spatula.
anywhere.
Yeah, but you
The
support
government
the
chased them
economic
out.
theories that have resulted in the offshoring.
And the reason that housing is so expensive is because the government subsidizes mortgages. The government co-signs everybody's mortgage. And so we have people who are able to borrow a lot of money that in a free market they couldn't borrow. And they take that money and they bid up home prices. The same thing happens with college tuition. The government allows everybody to borrow money to go to college. And therefore, the colleges jack up their prices because they know the kids can get the money from government guaranteed or government issued loans. I mean, the government is the reason that college is expensive. It's the reason that housing is expensive. And of course, we would be building a lot more housing if we had a lot fewer regulations that inhibit it, and including in a lot of these states that have regulations that are very antagonistic to landlords. I mean, there
Yeah, but I
are
really
parts of
just
this.
don't understand your point here. I mean, let's say, for example, that the government reduces all restrictions. They get rid of the tort of nuisance so that you can't sue neighbors for land use policies, yada, yada, yada. Okay, let's just say that you can build as much housing as you want for as cheap as you want. I mean, what you're suggesting ultimately is that we open the border, allow as many people as want to come to America to come to America. But the reality is that you don't actually have America anymore. I mean, you
Well,
look at the population. No, it will cease to exist because
well,
if
look,
you open the borders to the levels that you're looking at, look, there's almost 1.5 billion people in India. Okay, India there's probably 300 million
first of
Indians who
all,
would want to move to America, and then you would be stuck in a situation where ultimately within the space of a few years, you have one Indian for
yeah,
every American, and it wouldn't even make a dent in India's population. And we see that. I mean, you look at Canada. In the last 2 years, 4 million Indians moved to Canada. 4 million. Okay, that's
yeah.
like 10% of the
Well,
population in 2 years. And has that helped the Canadian people? Obviously not. It's
well,
destroyed the quality of life for the
what
Canadian
I would
people.
like.
And opening America's borders will completely destroy the quality of life for
Uh,
the American people, and it
okay,
will actually destroy the existence of America as a people.
no, okay. What I would like to see
America will
is
become India. It will not
no,
be America anymore. You can't
no.
change the you
What
can't people are not fungible commodities. You cannot take the people of a nation,
the whole
replace them with a
country was
foreign nation.
was is here because of immigrants. We were. I mean, everybody came here. I mean,
Yeah, over the space of 400
very
years.
few people can trace their roots back to the Mayflower. But what I would like to do
I mean, a
is,
lot of us can, Peter.
You
yeah,
you,
that's what I
you got to
said.
let Mr.
Where,
Schiff respond,
but
please.
But what I would like to do before we open up the borders, and when I say open up the borders, I'm not talking about a free for all where anybody could just come in, right? I want to have a procedure for legal immigration, but I don't want to make it difficult for people to legally come to America. But what I want to do is turn off any kind of welfare magnets that may exist, not just for potential immigrants, but for anybody who's already here, right? I don't want these federal welfare programs, any of them, right? To the extent that there's charity, and I'm fine with private charity, it needs to be the private sector that provides it. We can't have government just writing checks to people for health care and education and housing and food stamps and all this stuff, right? We didn't have any of these programs when my grandparents came here. They all came to this country and they got nothing. There were no welfare workers. There were no caseworkers here to meet them. They showed up and they fended for themselves, right? And so what I want to do is get rid of all these welfare programs so that anybody who comes to America is not coming to be a drain on our society. They are coming here because they want to roll up their sleeves and go to work. And they're going to improve our country.
Well, how
Yes,
many
some of
people is
them
that?
will,
500 million?
some of them
600
will
million?
want to rent apartments, but some of them will help build those apartments. The
700
more
million?
freedom we have, the more workers we have, they're a resource, right? We want them to come here.
People are not resources.
Sure
So,
they are.
Mr. Schiff, would you have
People are
the
not
state
Labor
resources.
is
limit?
a huge resource.
Well,
Now,
okay. Well,
maybe
Mr. Schiff,
maybe that'll be displaced by robots. We'll see. But
so
for now, we need humans to do work.
if there's an abolition of the welfare state, either overnight or over a period of time, would you have the government put a quota on the number of people who could move to America?
I don't know. I mean, if there'd be a quota on it. I mean, I don't know if there was ever a quota during the 19th century. I don't know what, there seemed like there were millions and millions of people. Um, but
Well,
I
how
think
many do
that,
you want, though?
look, I mean, we have a lot of land. We have a lot of, if people want to come to this country and work and start businesses and provide their labor, then I think we all benefit from that, right? What we don't benefit from is people coming in and just going on welfare and public assistance and all that. And there are people that come for that reason. And if we turn that magnet off, then those people would stop coming. And a lot of people who are here for that reason, maybe they just leave, right? Fine, good riddance. Don't let the door kick you in the ass. You know, there may be
Mr.
some
Morrison,
people that were born here that don't want to live here if they can't be on welfare.
Well, how
Mr.
many?
Morrison,
I want to hear
should-
from Peter. I want to see how many immigrants he wants to bring
I don't
in.
know.
What's
I
the
don't know the
optimal
answer
number?
to that question.
So there's no
Okay,
cap.
But I don't think immigrants are the problem. I think they're a scapegoat. I think they make a convenient scapegoat to blame our problems on immigrants. You know, we have real serious problems, but we cause them ourselves with our economic and monetary policies that have been so destructive to our economy. I mean, that's what we've been doing. We've been perpetuating these bad
So no
policies
cap on
that have
immigrants. You
produced
just
these
let
deficits
the free
that
market
have
decide how
resulted
many
in the
people move here.
deindustrialization of our country.
So
Mr.
no cap.
Morrison, what would you have the quota be?
There should probably be a moratorium. It should be zero, effectively, perhaps on a case by case basis. You could let in some people, but in terms of H-1B visas, it should be zero. It should be zero H-1Bs, and then for regular immigration, you know, you can look at it on a country by country basis. You know, whether or not they're reciprocating, whether or not the markets are culturally compatible. I mean, there's other things you could factor in, but I think it's fair to say, you know, very, very few. You know, when I was
Well,
a
again,
kid, when I was a little kid,
if you
I used to
eliminate
live in a
those
city.
visas, if you eliminate those visas, those people are still going to work for U.S. companies. They're just not going to be here. They're just going to work from home. So is that really better?
They're not going to do that because we're going to put tariffs on it. They're not. The industry is staying in America. The jobs are going to stay in
what
America.
industry? It's already gone. And you can't put
We
tariffs.
got to protect what we have, and we've got to reshore
No.
our factories and our
How are you
industrial
going to
base.
tariff? So let's say I'm a small tech company, and I outsource. I pay somebody to write some code in India or to do something. How do you tariff that? I'm just writing a check. Nothing is coming into the country. I'm just sending money out to pay somebody who's working from home in India. How are you tariffing that?
I mean, that's a complicated tax
I
law
mean,
question.
Yeah,
I don't think
you
we're going to get
can't.
into that here.
No, but so how
right.
is that better? How is that better for this country if we just send checks to India instead of allowing somebody from India to come here?
It's not. We should not be offshoring our tech industry to India.
But how are you going
We
to
should
stop
not be
companies
bringing
from doing
Indians
that?
to come and run our tech industry here. We should be investing in
how are you going to
Americans.
stop a U.S. business from hiring from hiring a consultant in India? Are you going to make that illegal?
You can tariff services in the same way that you tariff goods.
So, but you tariff things that are coming in. So you would basically say that if I pay somebody abroad, let's say I pay somebody $50,000 a year, you're going to put a tariff on the money I'm sending and saying, okay, you can send 50,000, but you got to pay the government 20,000 on top of that or something like that.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. So the average tech worker in India earns about $33,000 US dollars. The average tech worker in America earns about $100,000. If you're going to hire, if you're a company and you want to offshore the tech to India, you want to hire the Indian tech worker, let's say you tariff them $70,000. So this level the playing field. They're not going to hire the Indian tech worker anymore. They're going to hire.
Well, you're right. If you make it so expensive to hire somebody in India, you're going to hire somebody in America. But then what you're going to end up doing is making that business globally uncompetitive. Because here I am in America, and I have to overpay my tech workers compared to what my competitive are doing in other countries who can hire Indians, right? So they're hiring people for 30,000. I'm hiring them for 100,000. How am I going to compete then on price? So my business is going to be destroyed. Then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to say, okay, we won't allow any of these imports to come in. We have to jack up the prices so that the only things Americans can buy are things that are made in America, produced by Americans. So we're not going to let Americans buy anything that's, and then you're going to dramatically lower our standard of living because
maybe if we stopped training all of the Indian tech workers, we wouldn't have the problem that they're competing with us. But here's the deal. If we outsource our technology to India and we bring Indians to work here and then they go back and teach them, we're building up competitors anyways. I mean, we're planting the seeds of our own destruction. You understand that, right?
No.
Like when we built up China's industrial capacity, China is now a massive competitor to America, both economically
But you know what?
and regionally, right?
But
They were not a
China,
competitor before we gave them all of our technology, or they stole the technology, or we invested in their factories. I mean, this is totally senseless. It's just like
look,
you're
China,
there's
look,
a competition, and what America is
all right,
doing is we're training our
let
competitors.
me ask you a question. Look, I don't look at China as a competitor to me. I mean, look, if a Chinese doctor invents a cure from cancer, are you not going to take it? Are you going to say, those damn Chinese? I mean, wouldn't it be great if China cured cancer? Would that be a problem for you?
No, but that's not really what we're talking about.
Well,
It's a
whatever.
problem
Yes.
when
Well,
China
if
builds all of the
China,
engines and ball bearings for
yeah,
American
it's
fighter
look,
jets. Like,
if
that's a
China
huge problem.
invents something that makes my life better, I'm happy with that. China doesn't have to fail for me to succeed. The more prosperous China is, the better. The
Yeah,
more
but we are
entrepreneurs there
failing.
are in China,
We are failing because
doesn't hurt
China's
us.
succeeding.
China doesn't make us poor by getting rich, right? So this
They do
whole
if it's
idea that it's
based on
us
our
against
expense,
them.
though. I mean, the reason China is rich is because, in large part, America got poorer.
Well, no, they would have. They would actually have gotten a lot richer, I think, if they hadn't subsidized us to the degree that they did. I think they made a mistake in overvaluing the dollar and buying all these treasuries and buying all our mortgage-backed securities. They should have let the dollar tank decades ago. They should have consumed more of what they produced themselves. They should have traded with nations that actually had stuff to give them instead of paper. I think that was, I think they
Well,
caused a lot of
we didn't give them
malinvestments.
paper. We gave them all of the industrial technology that they're currently using to
Well,
outcompete us.
we didn't
I
give
mean,
them that.
China,
They
you
earned
look
that.
at China 50 years ago, okay?
Yeah, they were
They
a
barely had
communist
access to
country 50 years
automobiles,
ago.
okay?
They
Yeah,
were
I
a
mean,
communist country.
well, it's not just that they were a communist country. They were a low-tech country, right?
Yeah,
I
because
mean,
they were
we gave them all
communists.
of that technology. We gave them all of the technology. We trained them how to build products. We
Well, look,
trained them how to build the technology,
we
and now we're
didn't give
buying
them
it from
anything.
them.
They earned what they have. They worked hard. They freed up their economy. We squandered stuff. I agree. We squandered a lot of our technology. We
Yeah, we should have
squandered
kept that
a lot
technology
of our
here. I mean, it
industries.
just doesn't. It's just no common sense to me. I mean, if you're talking about, let's replace China and America with China Corp and America Corp, and they're both based in New York City. Do you think it makes any sense at all for New York Corp to take people from China Corp, train them on all their proprietary industrial technology, uh, and then give them back to China Corp? You wouldn't have a
No,
business anymore. America Corp would go bankrupt in the space of 10 years, and that's
we
exactly what's
already are
happening to
bankrupt.
America.
We already are bankrupt. But it's not about America Corp. It's about Americans
You
trying
cannot
to
train your
produce goods
competition. You
and
cannot give your technology to your
using
competition.
Chinese resources to do it. American companies built factories in China because it was more economical to build them there. It was to
Correct.
their advantage to do it.
But
And
it
they
was
were
not to
producing
America's
products
advantage.
for Americans to consume. And so American consumers got a better deal. But the thing is, why? Why was it that
How did
American
the American
businesses—
consumer get a better deal when we both agree that Americans are much worse off now than they were before we
Yes,
started this
yes,
process?
yes,
How do
they
you
are
square that
worse off.
circle?
They are worse off. But they got a better deal given the circumstances that the government created. Look, if we never built up this massive government, if we stayed a real free market capitalist economy like we were in the 19th century, if we hadn't erected this massive social welfare state financed with income taxes and payroll taxes and had all these government agencies and all these departments doing all kinds of crap, right? We would be far more prosperous right now. We never would have outsourced all these factories, right? We would be building all this stuff
The
ourselves.
offshoring would have happened anyways. And the reason for that is because A, the markets are asymmetrical, and B, these foreign countries are not looking at this from an economic perspective. They're looking at it from a business perspective. They're looking at it from a power perspective. China knows, for example, that there's a lot of power to be made in manufacturing ships. They know that their, real economic power is tied to the production of real wealth, and
Well, you
it's
know what?
capital accumulation. So what they did is they took a bad deal in the short term to manufacture, cheap goods for America, quote unquote cheap goods. with the knowledge that 20 years later, they'll have all of the industrial capacity in China. What China is doing is they were thinking like investors, and America were thinking like economists. And of course, the economists always lose. You got to think like an investor. If we were thinking like an investor, would NVIDIA's data centers and production be abroad, or would it be in America? NVIDIA is the most valuable company in the world, and they don't even make the stuff here.
It's not up to a government to decide that shipbuilding is what they should do. It's up to the free market to decide. If there's a demand for ships, then the market will supply ships. Entrepreneurs will build ships.
But you can't just do that on a dime. If there's a conflict, there will be a demand for ships. There will be a demand for tires. There'll be a demand for ball bearings. And America doesn't make any of those things. So what do? We just roll over and die? This is like... this is a national security concern. Yeah, but we're talking...
Look, America used to have a comparative advantage in freedom. That was our main advantage. We were the freest people in the world, and we were the most productive people in the world because we were the freest. And we could pay high wages and still be a low-cost producer because of all the freedom we had. That resulted in a high savings rate and lots of capital investment and tremendous worker productivity. That's what we need to go back to. Right? We need to dismantle big government to get back to that free market economy.
We can't get back to that if all of the capital is being invested abroad, and we both know that.
Well, but it won't be invested abroad if we fix what's broken here.
No, it's a tug of war. It's asymmetrical. If we're not willing to invest in our industries, China is, and China will still lure away the industries. The no-brainer, because they're thinking 20 years in advance, not what's good today.
I don't want bureaucrats thinking 20 years in advance. I mean, that's just going to be counterproductive.
I know that's what we have right now, and look at how well it worked.
No.
Let's take another empirical example of Amazon or Google. When it comes to antitrust legislation, as far as the government limiting the size that a firm can have within a certain industry, is antitrust legislation something you would support, Mr. Morrison?
I think, in general, antitrust legislation has proven effective in the past. I don't know precisely how effective it would be for, a virtual company like Amazon or Google. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's kind of like dealing with new territory, so I don't have an awful lot to say about it.
Sure. Mr. Schiff, you want to take 30 seconds on antitrust, Amazon and Google specifically?
Well, I would abolish all antitrust laws. I think the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act were a big mistake. I think all of the so-called monopolies that have been broken up, I think, it was not the consumers that were upset. It was the competitors who couldn't compete. And so they got the government to interfere and break up a more efficient competitor. I don't believe that monopolies result from free market competition. I think they result from government, where governments give out special privileges and they create monopolies and cartels, and they protect their favorite individuals or companies from competition. Look, an example I used to like to use of how ridiculous it is the U.S. government broke up a merger between Blockbuster and Hollywood Video a few years before pretty much all of the video rental companies were put out of business by Netflix, but nobody knew about Netflix. And the government said, we can't allow Hollywood Video and Blockbuster to merge because they'll have a monopoly on video rentals. And therefore, the government spent all this money to prevent these two companies that went out of business anyway from merging because they couldn't see Netflix right around the corner, right? Government bureaucrats don't know, right? And so let businesses, try to maximize their profits by minimizing their costs and providing the best possible services at the lowest possible price. And I don't want bureaucrats coming in there and trying to second guess this and trying to say, no, we need to prevent this because there's not enough competition. Look, competition in and of it is not the ends, it's the means. The idea is we want low prices and high quality and not just a certain amount of competitors. And generally what has happened since the beginning, going back to, Rockefeller and Standard Oil, it's never the consumer. The consumer isn't getting ripped off or getting screwed over. It's other competitors who are having a hard time competing on either quality or price that go running to the government for help. And that's not what I
Thank
want. I want free markets, and I keep the government out of it.
Mr. Morrison, should the American federal government subsidize domestic companies or acquire a portion of their stock, just as was recently discussed with the case of Intel? Subsidies and the state owning portions of large, valuable companies. What are your thoughts on that, Mr. Morrison?
I would say in general, it's not preferable. I think what we ought to be doing is, rather than subsidizing individual companies, we should be subsidizing and protecting the American economy as a whole. Again, the reason that we want to do this is that we need to prioritize American financial interests, American business interests, American workers. They need to be prioritized as against foreign competition, right? That's the key. Frankly, I don't actually think that a lot of these investments would even be really required if we had a healthy economy that was growing and the supply chains were not being hollowed out. So I think to some degree, the reason that those may be perceived as necessary is because we're not doing the things we need to do to actually protect the economy as a whole. Now, on a case-by-case basis, there is a reason that the government may want to invest in a particular company or a particular industry. But it's a case-by-case basis. I mean, a good example, is in Great Britain a couple of months ago. In the United Kingdom, they were going to close. I think they did close the last steel forge in the country. And as a result, you have a country that no longer produces any steel. From my perspective, that would be a massive national security crisis that would jeopardize the long run, not just wealth of the country, but also the security of the country. So from that perspective, it may be necessary for the government to subsidize a particular industry. Another good example is shipbuilding. So if you look at shipbuilding, America used to be, at the close of the Second World War, the biggest shipbuilder in the world. Of course, America now produces basically no ocean-going vessels whatsoever. That's a huge problem. That's an industry that requires protection, and because the capital investment costs are so high, there's massive capital barriers to entry to shipbuilding. There might need to be some special treatment there to get that industry off the ground, but that's not necessarily an economic prerogative. That's more of a national security prerogative. So I think we have to balance those competing interests. It's in America's best interest that we produce ships, at least a de minimis amount of ships that could be scaled up in the case of supply chain disruptions or international conflict. And I don't see how that's possible without, some specialized investment or protection.
Yeah.
Mr. Schiff, you made your position clear. You don't want bureaucrats making these decisions. You want them decided by the market. Can you please address Mr. Morrison's concern that there are certain industries, certain products, certain services that it's important that American domestic producers control? Because if we don't, it could be a national security risk for another country to either have a big share or even a potential monopoly on some on some things.
Well, first of all, you mentioned the shipbuilding industry. One of the reasons it's such a disaster is because of the Jones Act that was instituted to protect the American shipping industry, and it's helped destroy the American shipping industry. And it's also driven up the cost dramatically. I live here in Puerto Rico, and everything we buy is so expensive because it has to come here on a Jones Act compliant ship, which means it costs a fortune to get stuff here. And particularly impacts Hawaii as well, although I think it's more impactful here in Puerto Rico. But all across the coasts, we could be sending a lot more stuff via ships, and we don't do it because of the Jones Act. Look, the government should not subsidize any industries, because whenever the government subsidizes an industry or a business, it stifles another industry or business, because the government doesn't have any resources. It has to just redirect them. So when the government decides that it's going to take money away from other businesses and give it to the business it wants to subsidize, right, it is altering where the free market would otherwise have allocated those resources. So what the government is saying is, we don't like what market forces are doing. We are going to substitute our own judgment. We think the market is wrong. We think the market should be investing in this business instead of where market forces would have otherwise directed it. And whenever the government does that, you are going to screw stuff up, right? And of course, your decisions are always going to be motivated by politics. That's what happens. In the free market, it's motivated by efficiency, by profit and loss, by the price signal. So you're going to get it right. But when you empower politicians to reward their friends who are bribing them and helping them to get elected, most of the times that's where the subsidies are being directed, to the industries that are most closely in bed with the government, either through legal contributions or bribes or who knows what's going on. And under no circumstances should the government be taking an equity position in a private company. That's the last thing that we would want the U.S. government to do, is to have, it's supposed to be a level playing field. But now, if you've got government that owns a particular company, I mean, that's like, in a football game, maybe the ref decides that he's going to play for one of the teams, right? Obviously, it's not going to be a fair game if the ref is wearing the uniform of one of the teams. The government needs to stay out. Clearly,
yeah, but it should be a rigged game, though. We don't want we don't want the playing field to be level. We want it asymmetrically weighted in our favor.
No,
but we want a crooked ref.
It's not,
but we want the ref to be in America's favor.
You're talking about the U.S. government picking an American industry to subsidize at the expense of the industry that it doesn't subsidize, or the
but the reality is that some industries are more critical for national security than others, and some are more valuable than others.
Who's supposed to determine that? I don't want government bureaucrats determining that. I want to live in a free market economy.
Can we just be honest for a moment? The fact of the matter is that if you don't manufacture ships, that's a much bigger problem than not manufacturing T-shirts. Okay,
no, all right, no, but
they're not the same thing.
The government destroyed the shipping industry. The minute you give the government power to do this stuff, I don't want to put my faith in politicians who I'm not going to trust. They have their own political agenda, and they're not risking their own money. They're taking taxpayer money. They say that you shouldn't let the government pick winners and losers. The main reason is they pick losers. That's what they do. They misallocate.
We should be picking American companies as winners in general, though.
No. I don't want the government deciding which businesses should get money.
Okay, yeah, but Peter, the government always decides. If it's not America's government, if it's not, they're not supposed to, but they do, because the reality is, if it's not America's government picking the winners and losers using tariffs and other subsidies to support American companies, then guess what? It's the Chinese government supporting Chinese companies and businesses.
Look, it's like
either America can pick the winners and losers, or China can pick the winners and losers. You don't actually get to have your cake and eat it too. You have to come back to the real world and understand that China is picking winners. China is picking Chinese companies to win. So if we want to compete with them, we have to do the same thing.
No, we don't.
Of course we do.
If one country is dumb enough to let
and that's why we have no shipbuilding capacity.
My point. If one country is dumb enough to allow bureaucrats to pick the winners and losers, you don't have to make the same mistake. A country that is a free market economy is going to outcompete any centrally planned economy. If you substitute the judgment of a politician for the free market, you are going to undermine the overall productivity of the country.
Yeah, but this is not grounded in actual historical analysis.
No, it is.
I mean, no, it's not. I mean, look. You got to read my book. Obviously, you need to understand the economic history.
I don't have to read your book because you wrote it. I already can understand what.
Yeah, you got to understand. You got to understand how it works. I can take you all the way back to the medieval ages. Okay, no, we go all the way back to the Middle Ages. England. Let's talk about England and Flanders. Okay. Let's talk about England and Flanders. Flanders was exporting finished cloth to England. England was exporting raw wool to Flanders, and this was the economic paradigm. The economic, the bulk of the economic weight was in Flanders because they had more capital accumulation, because there was a lot more technology and mechanics that went into fulling wool than just raising sheep. Now, of course, the kings of England understood that they were spending all of this money to buy products, and they were stuck in a low margin industry. So what the kings of England did is they say, we're not going to ship any more wool to Flanders, and in fact, we're going to bring in people from Flanders to set up shop in England. And what happened over it took about 100 years, but what happened is England actually used its advantage in wool to build up its own textile industry, and it killed Flanders' textile industry. Textile production in Flanders was cut by about 50%, and it increased proportionally in England. And the reality is that benefited England enormously, because now England not only was making the wool, but it had all of the high tech, the so-called high tech industry in England. And I'll tell you what, if England was stuck on a pastoral economy, they never would have benefited or created the Industrial Revolution, because technology is path dependent and it builds on what comes before. If you want to gain advantage and innovate the next technology, you have to have a large share in the current technology, right? Yeah, well, so the reality is the banana republics stay banana republics. And because developed countries,
their governments stifle their creativity.
No, they didn't. It had nothing to. I just gave you a clear-cut historical example of economic warfare.
I don't have enough of the other facts about.
There's no other facts. Put a boycott of wool on Flanders, destroyed their industry, and replaced it, and thereby profited.
I don't know all the other factors of those kingdoms and what.
That's called economic warfare. That's what China's doing to America right now.
No, just look at American history. Look at the country that we built on economic freedom here in America.
And highest tariff walls in the world.
No, we did not have the highest tariff wall.
We literally did, though.
We had
America had the highest tariff walls in the world.
How many years of that history and again,
over a century.
No, but how many years of that century were the tariffs high? Because they raised them and lowered them and raised them and lowered them. But they were mainly there to generate revenue, because that was the only source of revenue the government had. The only other revenue they had taxes on liquor, they had taxes on tobacco, firearms. That was pretty much it. And then they had tariffs.
Yeah, but they also kept foreign goods out. I mean, one of the big problems in the American Revolution is that the colonists didn't actually manufacture anything.
No. If they kept foreign goods
France
out, they
donated
wouldn't raise any revenue. The tariffs don't raise revenue if you don't import goods. The tariffs were there to raise revenue. They were
also there to stimulate domestic production. It's literally in Alexander Hamilton's report on manufactures of 1791.
Yeah, well,
that was one of the purposes of tariffs.
Right, but if we had a government, look, I would have no problem if we went back to the 19th century tariffs. If we also went back to the 19th century government. So we got rid of 95% of our government, right? No more Social Security, no more Medicare, Obamacare, welfare, none of this stuff. Get rid of all these agencies, get rid of all these departments, and we get rid of 95% of the government spending, and then we could raise the 5% that we need through tariffs. I'm totally fine with that.
Well, that can be another thing that you agree on. You both would go back to the 1800s legislatively, not technologically, of course, because if we did, we wouldn't have zero hedge debates like this.
Who knew we agree on tariffs?
Peter Schiff agreed that he would take that if you could get rid of the welfare and all the income tax. Didn't he just say that he would accept tariffs if it would replace those other things? Didn't President Trump say that on Joe Rogan's show?
Yeah, but Trump's not willing to shrink government. Trump wants government to get bigger. That's what he did with the big, beautiful bill. The government we had under Biden is even bigger under Trump. We're spending even more money. We're borrowing even more money. So Trump can't get rid of the income tax. He needs to raise higher income taxes because he's increasing government spending. That's one of my biggest problems with Trump is he's a massive big spender. And what he wants is more inflation. He's dying to get the Fed to create more inflation to monetize these deficits.
I'm not going to have Mr. Morrison defend President Trump. We would be here forever. At least we got some clarity on the tariffs. We agreed on the minimum wage. We both hate GDP as a measure of standard of living. We both say capital investment and technological advances is how people become wealthy. We both said, both of you said, all else equal, freedom is superior to central planning in general. So that is excellent. I want to end with a 2-minute 2 3-minute statement from each of you. Say that I just wanted to get a summary of your position on this debate. And the only thing I care about is the American working class, people who are citizens here already. I just care about the working guy. I see too many poor people getting food stamps. I see too many billionaires, hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. I just care about the American working class. Why should I support your ideas? Mr. Morrison, please take 2 minutes to talk to the average member of the American working class.
Well, I mean, ultimately, the nation needs to serve the interests of the people. That is the government's primary role. It's not to serve the interests of any individual. It's to serve the people as a whole. And interests sometimes don't align. The interest, for example, of big business often is to export their production to foreign countries to take advantage of cheap labor abroad. This is not in America's best interests, though. And the reason for that is because it takes those jobs and that productive capital and moves it abroad, which kills jobs, stagnates wages, and ultimately lowers the ability of the economy to grow in the long run. Because like I said at the beginning of the debate, the economy grows when the technology grows. And the only way to do that is to build on what came before. So ultimately, if you offshore all of the productive technological assets to different countries, you do not have those productive technical assets in America. And of course, you don't have that knowledgeable human capital to continue growing the economy in the long run. So the best way to help the American worker is to prioritize American interests over foreign interests. We don't want a neutral playing field. We want the government to take an active role in promoting American business interests abroad. Doing so will help raise wages and get us back to where we were, economically in the 1970s. What we would like, ideally, is to have the ordinary American person doesn't need to doesn't need to become a lawyer, should be able to raise a healthy family, should be able to afford a home. That's what we want to get back to. The only way to do that is to prevent all of the good paying jobs and all of our technical expertise from going abroad. So if I could just leave the listeners with one thing that I think is really important. The American people exist and they have to put their interests first.
Mr. Schiff, that was 2 minutes and 7 seconds. Please take roughly 2 minutes to summarize your position. Imagine you're talking directly to the average American worker.
Yeah, there's I guess an old saying about the most dangerous words in the English language. I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. Generally the government achieves the opposite of what they set out to achieve. So you don't want to task the government with trying to make things better for American workers because they'll end up making them a lot worse. Look, when you're talking about what we can do to best help the worker, I assume you mean people who want to cash a paycheck, not write a paycheck, because the people who write the paychecks generally work a lot harder than their employees who cash them. But if you want to have an economy that benefits people who want a job, you need a free market that allows businesses to start up and flourish. Because if my goal is to be hired, I want a lot of businesses that could hire me. I want a lot of businesses competing with each other to hire me. And the best way to have a lot of employers is to have a free market economy where you don't tax and punish people for starting companies and becoming employers. So we need to eliminate a lot of the regulations and taxes that drive up the cost of owning a business and starting and growing a business so that we have more viable employment opportunities. And you want to keep prices as low as possible because the rich, it doesn't matter if somebody is rich. They don't really care what groceries cost. It's no big deal. They're just going to buy the groceries. But if you're, living paycheck to paycheck, your grocery bill is very important. If prices are too high, you may not be able to afford to eat some of the foods you want to eat, or you may have to give up something else because you need to pay for food. So the way we keep prices low, right, is also low regulations, but you don't want to jack up prices with tariffs. You don't want to jack them up with protectionism, and you don't want to create massive inflation. which is what we're doing now. And you don't want to perpetuate asset bubbles. You don't want to pursue economic policies that make stock prices go up, but also make grocery prices go up. The government creates a lot of inflation to reward people who own assets at the expense of workers who earn paychecks. So we have to balance the budget, stop creating inflation, lower regulations, lower taxes, so that we can have more employers that can pay more workers, a decent living, so they can buy the things that they want. So we need free market capitalism and a lot less government.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Thanks to everyone for watching the Zero Hedge debate series. Just a reminder, Spencer Morrison has a book, Reshore, How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. Mr. Schiff has a book titled How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. Most important of all, I have a book, Domestic Imperialism, 9 Reasons I Left Progressivism. Thanks to everyone for watching Zero Hedge. Have a good day.